Okay, so I'm making this for students that might have been absent on Friday. The whole point of this activity that we did in class was to see how can we make sure our CERs that we're doing, like we did on our tests on Thursday, have enough detail. How do we know that we're looking at the evidence and actually writing evidence instead of reasoning? So we're going to go through a couple things on this today. And then once you're done watching this, you can go ahead and go onto your test, post it in Google Classroom. Remember, it's called Photosynthesis CER from week 6. And you can work on improving and editing and making sure your answers are good to go. I'm going to be grading them on Monday. So make sure you work on that over the weekend so that you can make sure you have a good grade for your CER part of your test. Let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to read up here where it says scenario. So in this scenario, I want to send my snake Sunny to the moon. I have everything prepared for his trip except for his oxygen supply. To make sure he'll be safe, I want to do a few experiments here on Earth. Experiment 1. Just to make sure snakes are similar to people and breathe in oxygen, for my first experiment, I will put Sunny into a sealed box along with a sensor to measure the amount of CO2, O2, and the humidity. So, you can see below we have a data table. In our data table, we have time, CO2 levels, O2 level, and humidity. You can also see that we measured these things at 0 minutes, 5 minutes, and 10 minutes into the experiment. So, our first question here, number 1, says, what is happening to the amount of CO2 over time? So what we want to do is we want to look at our CO2 level at the beginning, the middle, and the end and see how it changes. We can see at minute 0, it starts at 500. After 5 minutes, it goes up to 750. And after the 10 minutes, it's gone up to 900. So we want to write that down over here. What is happening? The CO2 level is increasing from 500 to 900. Now, when we do our CER, the part we're doing right now is the evidence part. Our evidence is some sort of data we collect either by observation or from a data table using numbers. So remember that for when you are working on your own CER for the test. Number 2 here says what is happening to the amount of O2 over time. So we're going to look at the O2 levels and we can see we start at 10,000. After 5 minutes, it goes down to 9,500. And after 10 minutes, it's down to 9,000. So again, we can go back. We can write O2 level is decreasing from 10,000 to 9,000. So that's our evidence for this particular experiment. We'll go on and we're going to look at the reasoning now. So our reasoning starts right here. And it says, will Sunny survive if I kept him trapped in this box? Assume he has plenty of food and water. Use the data above to support your reasoning. So the first thing we're going to do is our claim. We are going to answer this question here. Will Sunny survive if I keep him in this box? Hopefully from looking at the data, you realize that no, he would not survive if we kept him in this box. So we're going to start by saying that for our claim. No, Sunny would not survive in the box. That's our claim. Now we're going to say because, and that's when we start to give our reasoning. Hopefully you can tell that if the O2 levels are dropping, like our data shows, that eventually if he stayed in the box, he would run out of O2, and because he is an organism like you or me that needs to breathe, He'll run out of oxygen. He won't be able to breathe. So we're going to add that because our data shows O2 levels are decreasing. This means he will eventually run out of O2 to breathe. Okay, so it's really important when you guys are giving your reasoning that you include detail and that you mention the evidence, okay, the data that you collected or that you used from a data table or a graph. If you can't do that, then you're definitely going to miss out on some points on your test. All of your reasonings should have some sort of piece of data or evidence to back them up. So let's go ahead now and we'll look at experiment number 2 here below. So here is experiment 2. It says, next I decided to include a big bottle of cyanobacteria inside the rocket. I believe cyanobacteria are photosynthetic. To test this, I will put the cyanobacteria in the sealed box with my sensor, as well as a light. Remember, photosynthesis only happens when there is radiant energy. We've got the same setup for our experiment. We've got time, 0, 5, and 10 minutes, and we've got our CO2, O2, and humidity levels. So we're going to look at our data the same way we did last time. First, we're going to look what is happening to the CO2 over time. Hopefully you can see over here we start at 500, it goes down to 450, and it goes down again to 400. So we will say CO2 is decreasing from 500 to 400. And if we look at our O2 levels, we see that it goes from 10,000 at the beginning to 10,250 at the end. It's increasing. O2 is increasing from 10,000 to 10,250. Now we can go on to our reasoning. So we'll look down here at our reasoning. Are my cyanobacteria photosynthetic? In order to prove that, we're going to need to remember some things about photosynthesis. So up here at the top, I'm just going to write our chemical formula of photosynthesis to remind us. So we have CO2 plus H2O. We have our arrow, which represents our chemical reaction, and we know that light needs to be there. Those are our inputs, or the things that photosynthesis requires. On the right, we'll put our outputs, which is O2 and glucose. Okay? So remembering that CO2 is an input, that means it should be used up if our cyanobacteria are photosynthesis. We would expect that the levels of CO2 drop. And if we look at our actual data, we can see that this matches what we would expect. The CO2 levels are dropping. Now that's only half of the story. We also know when photosynthesis is happening, oxygen should be produced by the organism, by the plant usually, but this time we're talking about a bacteria. Okay? If we look at our data here that we collect, we can see that this also matches what we would expect. This O2 levels are rising. So because CO2 is dropping and O2 is rising, this matches what we would expect for photosynthesis, and we can conclude that the cyanobacteria are photosynthetic. So we are going to write out our reasoning. We'll start by answering our question with a claim. Yes, cyanobacteria are photosynthetic. We know because, and that's where our because comes in, And how we know we're starting to use reasoning? We know because we should expect the input of photosynthesis I'm just going to put photosynth to decrease and the output to increase. This matches our data. We can see CO2 decreasing and O2 increasing. Okay, so again, it's important that we explain what we think. That's why I included the part about photosynthesis and the inputs and outputs. Without that, it's really hard for me to tell what you understand about photosynthesis, so make sure you are giving detailed answers. That's the kind of thing we are talking about when we use detail. We're going to look at experiment 3 last. Experiment 4 is just a little extra, so I'm going to stop here at experiment 3. But it says, finally, I'm going to put Sunny and my cyanobacteria into the sealed box together with the lights turned on. Remember, my goal is to keep him alive for this trip. We're going to look at our CO2 levels. We start at 500 at minute 0. At minute 5, it's gone up to 550. And at minute 10, it's gone down a little to 525. Overall, it has increased, though. It went from 500 to 525. So we're going to write that down. CO2 increased from 500 to 525. And let's look at our O2 levels. Starts at 10,000, goes up a little bit to 10,050, and finally at minute 10 it goes up a little bit more to 10,100. So we can say that O2 is increasing from 10,000 to 10,100. Okay, now our big question for the whole sort of project here since the beginning was, will Sunny survive his trip? Our claim, hopefully you can figure it out, is that yes, he should survive his trip. Some students were a little bit confused because they saw the CO2 level increase a little bit. The main thing we're worried about for Sunny is that he needs oxygen to breathe. It isn't a big deal if the CO2 levels go up a little bit. There is a limit where it would be bad for him, but we're just going to assume that a little bit of an increase in CO2 is okay. As long as he has O2 to breathe, then he should be fine and he should survive. So we're going to write that down. We'll start with our claim. Yes, Sunny should survive his trip. That's our claim. Now we're going to give our reasoning. We can see in the data that O2 levels are still increasing. This means that Sunny should have a steady supply of oxygen for his trip and to breathe. Okay, so what you guys are going to do now is you are going to sort of use what you've learned here from this video, and you are going to try and go back to your quiz, and you are going to make sure that your answers have a similar amount of detail. You want to make sure that your evidence is explaining information from the data tables. So it's a good idea to use numbers and words like increase or decrease. And then you want to make sure that your reasoning uses that evidence to support a claim. So if you guys have any questions, you can always send me an email. My email's in Google Classroom. It's also on my slides, so you can look for it there. I also sent a parent square just today that you should have gotten, and it has my email also. Do your best. I'll see you guys on Monday, and remember, I'm going to close off this test on Monday morning, and I will work on grading those as soon as I can so that I can give those back to you guys. Have a great weekend, and if you made it all the way to the end, thanks for watching it and doing your best. See you guys. Bye.